I bought my DAC DMR radio that you've seen in an earlier review, the seller kindly included this frequency guide, which obviously came with the radio at the time. So bear in mind that this would have been the early 1990s, around 1992, 1993, I think, in the case of the DAC. And you'll see here that it's actually marked DAC Industries Incorporated on the booklet. I thought it would be interesting, since this is around 30 years old now, just to see what stations were on the air back then and whether any of them are still around today. So I thought we'd have a quick flick through the DAC frequency guide from the early 1990s. And there's even some instructions here on how to use the guide. And how that the various areas are divided up. But let's just have a look through the countries that we've got here. And hopefully you'll see the first one here is Argentina. Radio Diffusion Argentina, RAE. Now, as far as I know, Argentina are no longer on the air on shortwave. Underneath Argentina we have Australia, with the various target areas: Europe, Oceania, Africa and America here, all listed. Australia, of course, Radio Australia, long gone now. Brazil here, we have Radio Braz again. I think Brazil are gone. No longer to be found on shortwave. We have Canada, and of course, Radio Canada International listed here. Target areas: Europe, Middle East, Africa, America, and Asia, Oceania. Canada long gone. China, Radio Beijing. Well, China are probably the main dominant broadcaster still on shortwave. But even back then, we've got a whole host of frequencies for China, with target areas in Europe, Middle East, Asia, Oceania, and so on, Africa, and the Americas. So no surprise there. Very, very active 30 years ago, very active still. Colombia, Radio National Colombia, with the target areas just in the Americas here. But again, I don't think this is a broadcaster that's still around now. And we've got Radio Havana, Cuba. Cuba's still about. Not always the easiest to catch us here in Europe, but they are around. Again, a multitude of frequencies and target areas: Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa and the Americas. Then we have here Czechoslovakia, Radio Prague International. Radio Prague no longer with us, of course. Ecuador, HCJB, Voice of the Andes. Still around, I think, in a limited fashion, but I believe it's relayed by other broadcasters, HCJB. We've got France, Radio France International. They're still around to a limited extent. A couple of pages here, really, or certainly a page and a half devoted to France, with all the frequencies and target areas. Germany, Deutsche Welle, still available on internet radio, I believe, but no longer on shortwave. Again, a whole host of frequencies for Deutsche Welle. Target areas: Europe, Middle East, Oceania, Africa, America, and so on. Holland, probably my favourite shortwave broadcaster of all time, Radio Netherlands. Again, not been on shortwave for many years. In fact, Radio Netherlands themselves no longer in existence. They were for a while available on internet radio, but even that has ceased now, so no more Radio Netherlands. Iran, Voice of the Republic of Iran, think they're still to be heard from time to time. Again, not the easiest to catch us sometimes. We've got then Iraq, Radio Baghdad. That one's gone. One which would be interesting today, Israel Broadcasting Authority. Israel no longer on shortwave. We've got Italy with the listings here. Italian radio and television service. No longer on shortwave. Japan, Radio Japan, NHK. Not sure if NHK is still around. I haven't heard them for a very long time. If they are, I don't think they are. Another familiar one, Kuwait. Up until fairly recently, I used to hear Kuwait regularly on the 19-metre band in the mornings, early mornings, but I haven't heard Kuwait for some time now either. Not for 6 months to a year. Saudi Arabia, BKSA. I think Saudi are still broadcasting on shortwave. South Africa was a familiar one. Radio South Africa, Radio RSA. Very much gone. Spain, up until fairly recently, I think they are still on the air. Radio Exterior de España, with some limited broadcasts. Back in the 90s, we had target areas of Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa and the Americas. Radio Sweden, again, long gone, many years ago. Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, America. There's a very popular broadcaster on the shortwave bands when I was a young shortwave listener. And similarly here, we can just see on the listing, we've got Switzerland, Swiss Radio International. Again, a station that's no longer around with quite an extensive schedule. Go on to Thailand, Radio Thailand here. Now, I think Radio Thailand is still around. Hear them from time to time. Taiwan and the Voice of Free China. Again, I don't think they exist as a broadcaster anymore. United Arab Emirates, Voice of the United Arab Emirates. Not a broadcaster, I believe, that is still around. Move on here to the United Kingdom, of course, the BBC World Service. And BBC World Service are indeed still broadcasting on shortwave, but much less of a presence than back in the 90s. And we've got sort of 1, 2, 3, almost 4 pages of frequencies and target areas for BBC World Service back in the 90s. Interesting one here, United Nations Radio. I can recall hearing them in the 1980s. No longer around, based in New York, with Asia, Africa and America as target areas. VOA, Voice of America, still around. Again, in the 90s, or the whole world covered as target areas, pages and pages of frequencies here, lists and lists, various frequencies, and you can see that at any given time you are likely to come across a transmission from VOA, not the same today. Other US stations, we've got WCSN, WSHB, KHBI, KTBN and KSDA. I can recall picking up at least a couple of these, back in the 80s and 90s. Family Radio, WYFR, who remembers that? That was a very, very strong signal, religious broadcaster based in the US. And many times I'd listen to that. We have here then KCBI, KNLS, KVOH, WINB. I can remember KCBI and WINB there in my log, my little listener's log, as is WRNO and WHRI World Harvest Radio. Again, that was a very commonplace signal to be found on the bands back in the 80s and 90s. Coming towards the end of the booklet now, we've got the USSR as it was, so that just shows how much things have changed in the world since this was published. Radio Moscow, well, no Radio Moscow anymore. Russia does not have a presence on the shortwave bands. Quite surprising, really, but that's the way it is. And then we've got Far East Russia independent radio. You've got Radio Vilnius, Radio Kiev, Radio Yerevan, and Radio Tashkent. Again, I don't think any of these broadcasters are with us. So you can see there was a wide variety of countries on the air. And this was by no means an exhaustive list. This was just the DAC booklet that came with your portable radio. There are other broadcasters that I could think of that aren't in this booklet. I guess they've listed the ones that are maybe most likely to be heard. And we've got more frequencies with times of transmission and so towards the end of the booklet. But there it is. That's the DAC Industries frequency guide. I can recall that Radio Shack Realistic did something similar with air receivers. You'd have a little guide with some frequencies and identifications of broadcasters. So it wasn't particularly unusual, but nice to have a look at this one and just see how things have changed since the early 1990s, so 30 years ago on shortwave. The bands were a lot different. Thank you for watching.